My podcast, which I call the Citizen of Heaven podcast, is devoted entirely to the idea of worldliness, finding a way to be God's spiritual people in a carnal world. So obviously, I can speak indefinitely on the topic of worldliness. I don't plan on doing that here in this space. We've been talking about how we deal with worldliness for the last 5 weeks, I believe it is. I think we're going to have a couple of more lessons on this series, and then we're going to call it quits and move on to other things. I appreciate the good response that I have received from many people. If you are being blessed by these lessons, I certainly encourage you to share them with your friends and put them to work in your life in whatever way possible, as is always the case whether I speak it or not. If there is a mistake, if there is a problem with what you hear in this space, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and allow me to make whatever correction may be necessary. This week I wanted to talk about missing tile syndrome, which is a term that, as far as I can tell, was coined by Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager is a famous lecturer and author. I've been reading his book, Happiness is a Serious Problem, for my podcast recently, and he uses the term in that space. And it refers to our tendency to see what is not there rather than what is there, especially when we're in very advantageous circumstances. If you are putting up a backsplash in your kitchen, or if you're retiling your shower, or if you're in one of those office spaces where they have the insulated ceiling tiles up above you, it's very easy to ignore these things entirely when they are perfect. And it's very easy for us to ignore them also if they are half or less complete. Things are broken. Things are incomplete from time to time. But if you are staring at the ceiling and there is only one tile that's missing, we tend to obsess over that. If there is only one tile in the shower that is missing, we obsess over that. And the irony is, the fewer things that are wrong in this mosaic, the more upset we get. I'm not sure that's a scientific principle necessarily, but I think it's fair to say that's a human tendency. And it speaks to the status of humans, especially Christians, for our purposes, in blessed circumstances, in modern day America, in a constitutional republic, a place where we are used to having our rights protected, where we're used to being able to speak our mind in the public square. When we have virtually everything that we want or perceive that we need, and then there is one thing that is denied to us, we tend to flip out. It is a problem when we are trying to pursue satisfaction in this life, and we confuse satisfaction with perfection. Most people are not in position to pursue perfection. They don't worry about it too much. Islanders, in impoverished nations who have never seen a ceiling in their life would not understand missing tile syndrome in the slightest. It is we who are privileged, who are in position to have 99% of what we want in our life. We're the ones that are afflicted by this. And it is caused by a worldly attitude. It is caused by thinking somehow that we can and that we should seek out an ideal life here on earth. 200 years ago, 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago, this would have seemed nonsensical to God's people because so much of life was fraught with pain and struggle and hardship and difficulty. The idea of having a good day would have been completely foreign to people in the Dark Ages. They had days when they survived and they had days that they didn't survive, and that's basically it. Today, we measure the quality of our days. That's not a bad thing. I'm not wishing for a return to the Middle Ages by any stretch. But it is worth noting here that the amount of blessings, the degree to which our blessings spread across our physical existence, tend very strongly to be negatively attached to our level of contentment. Contentment is more difficult to find in these easy times than it is oftentimes in the hard times. What I wanted to do is talk about this phenomenon a little bit, talk about our tendency to be dissatisfied when logic would indicate we ought to be much more easily satisfied in our life. I think at the core of missing tile syndrome is the idea of arrogance. That somehow not only is this possible, but that we are entitled to it. We see any number of political groups, social groups, people in the church as well, thinking that things can and must be perfect. And by perfect, we're talking about having everything that we want. Having a church that completely and totally suits our needs, that we are entitled to this, and something is horribly wrong when we do not get it, or at least it's wrong to us, and if it's wrong to us, that's all that really matters anyway, because the world revolves around us. That's the way that we tend oftentimes to think. Now, if we're Christians, hopefully we are wise enough to realize that that is not what we ought to be doing, that we ought to be better than that. The problem comes in self-diagnosis. Are we like these people in Laodicea that John writes to, the words of Jesus in Revelation 3, verse 17, we are rich and we have need of nothing. The idea that we have gotten here, that we are at the pinnacle of our existence, as it were, that we're better than other people. Wouldn't we rather be the rich ones or the comfortable ones or the empowered ones, however you may define success in this world? When we get these things, or we get most of them anyway, it tends to breed a sense of entitlement. And the right that Jesus gives to us, John 1 verse 10, is the right to become children of God, through verse 12 there, that this power, this right that he gives us to become children of God, that ought to be enough. That's what we are truly entitled to. Thinking that we are entitled to some certain level of existence, some level of achievement in our walk with Christ breeds this idea that you see in Laodicea, where people are independent of God and therefore dismissive of God. They may not put it that way. They may assemble on the Lord's Day, just like Christians do. But it's not because they need something from the Lord. They already have everything. And if there happens to be one little chink that is not there, they get angry about it and think that God entitles them to have that one little missing tile. Discontent is really at the key of all of this. The idea that we cannot be satisfied with 95% or 99% or 99.9% of what we want. We have ceased from the pursuit of contentment, and we want perfection instead. Now, we ought to be wise enough to realize that perfection is an implausibility anyway, that we're never going to get perfection in this life. We see that all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. The curse is placed upon the land. God has never intended for us to be able to find perfection in this life. So what we ought to be able to do is bypass that entirely and seek contentment instead. Contentment, of course, is having that same feeling of completion, that same feeling of purpose, but not necessarily because of our circumstances, oftentimes despite our circumstances. This is Paul's lesson he gives to us so many times, especially in the book of Philippians, one of the many letters that he writes from prison, it would seem. And he says, I've learned the secret of contentment. I've learned how to be with and without. I've learned to have and not have. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Paraphrasing Philippians 4, verses 12 and 13 there. Paul knows the secret. The secret is not to have more or to somehow get other people to have less. The secret is really not much of a secret at all. The secret is trusting that Jesus provides what we need, and whatever we have comes from the Lord. Whatever we have is a blessing from God, is his grace that he has showered upon us. And if he knows what is best for us, if he knows how we are best served in this life, how we can best achieve a heavenly life after this life is over, then surely it would be safe to assume that what we have right now is enough. Now, you may not choose to want to find contentment in pain, suffering, hardship, difficulties of political or social nature, economic nature, whatever. That's your right. And a lot of people don't find satisfaction, especially when they see or they think they see satisfaction on the horizon. But we as Christians, hopefully, we appreciate that it's not about finding a perfect life because, again, there is no perfect life, not in this life. God doesn't want us to have a perfect life here. and we are never going to find one. We are going to find one in heaven. That's going to have to wait for right now. So instead of striving for perfection, instead of striving for that one little missing tile that would make our life absolutely perfect, what we instead should do is be content and happy and satisfied where we happen to be in the moment. And I hope you appreciate how much better that is for us in pursuit of, when we consider that the pursuit of perfection is folly in the first place. And with any degree of experience, you're going to find that this is the case. Read Ecclesiastes sometime and read about Solomon's pursuit of perfection, how he realizes that the crooked cannot be straightened, that which is broken cannot be fixed. There is inherent breakage implied in the world. The world is just not going to be suitable. We've been reading in the book of Job in our 20 pages a week study here in Lakewoods Drive. And what better story can you get than Job to illustrate the world goes wrong sometimes. And sometimes you will never know, like Job, as far as we can tell, never knew why his world was turned upside down like it was. Maybe for no other reason than to remind us that the world isn't perfect. Well, if you know the world isn't going to be perfect, if you see the people out there in the world who strive for the perfect life and oftentimes seem like they get it, or they get very close to it anyway, and you expect them to be happy and satisfied and content, and instead they're bitter and angry and almost vicious because they have found in their blessings, they have found in their unbelievable level of satisfaction that there is still something that is missing. And I believe God made us this way, that we are supposed to find inadequacy. We're supposed to find missing tiles in our life here. Not so that we'll be frustrated, not so that we'll be dissatisfied, not so that we'll be angry or that we'll give up on God or think He's not blessing us, but to help us remember this world is not our home, that it is not supposed to be perfect, and to, instead of striving for perfection, instead strive for something that we can, in fact, achieve. That we can achieve contentment. We can achieve a level of satisfaction and accomplishment and purpose, not by filling in all the blanks in our wish list, but rather believing that God is our wish list. That God and His things and His purposes and His values, that's what we have always wanted in our life. And by pushing toward those things, we find that it's not about finding the missing pieces of our life. It's about realizing how blessed we already are. And that really speaks to the heart of this whole issue that we're dealing with here with missing tiles. How ungracious is it for us to receive and receive and receive in this life and still want more, and still, even beyond that, fuss because we don't get more? How ungrateful is that? I would like to think that if we are in the habit of daily thanking God for all the things that we have, and I hope and pray that you are, thanking God for our physical blessings, our spiritual blessings, the world that we live in, and all these advantageous circumstances that we enjoy in the modern day, that seem, at least on the surface, to make life a whole lot easier, that would seem to free up a lot more of our energy, a lot more of our time to pursue more noble goals, especially pursue God's goals in our life. But instead of giving God that much more glory in these moments, what we do is we fuss that there is still something that we have not yet received. We see this behavior in 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, maybe at Walmart, maybe in the mall, or maybe it's our own children or grandchildren. We see a complete lack of ability to appreciate what they have, an obsession over what they do not have, and once they somehow get those things that they don't have, they immediately become obsessed with other things. It's like they don't want to be happy. It's like they don't want to be content. They're always looking for what is wrong in their life. And we just shake our heads at such things and wonder how in the world it could be allowed to be the case. Now, with children, little children, oftentimes we blame the parents and say the parent should teach this child how to be grateful. And yet we as adults, assuming that the listeners here are adults, we approach life under God's Son exactly the same way, under the oversight of our Heavenly Father, who is trying to teach us gratitude, who is trying to teach us how wonderful our life is and how much better it will be when we find contentment in Him. And instead of thanking Him for the sun and the rain and the flowers and the stars and the trees and everything that we have in this physical life, and then beyond that, of course, thanking for our personal blessings, family and comfort and work and protection, our positive surroundings, family, and even beyond that, as Christians, thanking Him for Jesus and His death on the cross, thanking Him for the Bible that reveals His word to us, thanking Him for forgiveness that's available through Jesus and the time that we have to draw closer to Him and encourage other people to do the same. And of course, thanking Him for the hope that we have of heaven after this life is over. So many blessings. We could go on and on and on. And instead of doing that, or maybe in the middle of doing that, we offer up our complaints. And we would be so much more grateful if we got this other thing that God, for whatever reason, is withholding from us, the thorn in the flesh that He refuses to remove. Job's attitude immediately comes to mind. Job chapter 2 and verse number 10, where he confronts his wife, who is, her suggestion to his horrible circumstances is curse God and die. I've always been a little bit fuzzy on how that would help things. It seems like what she's saying is grow accustomed to the idea that God doesn't care about you anymore. Get to the point where you don't care about God either. And then you can just die in some kind of fit of anger. I don't know how dying in a fit of anger is better than dying in a fit of self-pity like Job was tending toward the middle of this book. How about, for a better idea, do what Job himself says we should do? Shall we accept blessings and not burdens? How is it appropriate for us to be thankful to God for the good things and yet think that He has abandoned us when we don't get the good things? The Lord gives and the Lord takes away, He says at the end of chapter 1 there. The reason why we resent the missing tiles is because we have so many other tiles. The reason that we are dissatisfied in the moment is because so many of our moments are wonderful. God has burdened us with too many blessings, not with not enough. And again, the better and better our life quality gets, the more and more difficult this lesson seems to be for us to learn. So let's back up. Let's rewind. Let's not look at the individual aspect of our life that we imagine is not going as well as it might, and instead look at other things. Now, if you're not a Christian, then this is going to be maybe not quite as easy for you as it would be for someone who has been bought by the blood of Christ, someone who is looking forward to heaven. But even if you're only thinking about this life, did you have air to breathe today? Did you have water to drink today? Do you have friends and associations? Well, my friends are jerks. Maybe some of them are, but some of them aren't. And the ones that are jerks aren't always going to act like jerks. There is always a positive aspect to this life, and that comes from God. And I suspect that if we spent more time giving Him the honor and the praise for the things that are going right, we would be less resentful, less angry about the things that we perceive are going wrong. And we might, in fact, be able to find a blessing in those thorns, a blessing in those missing tiles, that maybe it's better for me to not have this thing, that maybe if I had exactly what I want, I would mess things up. I would become irreverent, forget about God. The prayer of Agur that is given to us in Proverbs chapter 30 speaks directly to this. Give me neither poverty nor riches, he says. I think we're pretty good at praying for no poverty, but how about praying for no riches? Lest I deny you, he says. Surely it's better to trust that God is watching over us, that God is providing for us, and that we can find blessing, we can find favor, we can find God's grace where He has put us. And the more we focus on what God has done, and again, if you are a Christian, this should be somewhat easier for you, because no matter how bad things get in this life, you have heaven waiting after this life is over, and an eternity of bliss before the presence of God. Surely anything that we deal with in this life is worth that. So give thanks to God for these blessings. Give thanks to God for these hardships, these trials, these difficulties, these missing tiles. Because as we realize how flawed life is, we do what Paul does in the context of the thorn in the flesh. We learn to lean on God just that much more. We learn to appreciate our Savior just that much more. And it may very well be that we will grow in our appreciation for what God has done for us. We will grow in our appreciation for the place where we are and the marvelous circumstances that are ours. Step back and think about how marvelous it is, how amazing it is for us to live in the 21st century, for us to live in the age of the internet, for us to live in the age where you can go online and find some sermon from some total stranger, and because of that, grow in your understanding of God's will, grow in your commitment to the things of God, grow in your hope of heaven. What an amazing world this is. It has any number of difficulties, and don't get me started on that because we can go on and on forever. But instead of doing that, instead of whining about how much better it could be or how much better we may perceive that it has been in times past, instead let's give thanks to God for where we are, give praise to Him where we are, and grow in our appreciation, in our hope of an even better life, an even better fellowship that's waiting for us after this life is over. Thank you so much for listening and studying along. I hope that this draws you closer to God and closer to the people of God and God's purpose for your life. Thank you very much. God bless.